Chiwiwis! Woo! UFC Noche is this Saturday, and your favorite jabroni on YouTube is going to be breaking down every single fight on the card. Look, you guys know the drill. This segment of the channel is called Question Mark Picks. And look, last week's fight night, we started cooking a little bit. I went 8-4. It was a very nice bounce back from a few very questionable weeks that I had of picks. And I'm looking to carry that momentum into what's supposed to be a momentous card, but maybe for all the wrong reasons. The UFC has pumped a lot of money, or should I say, their friends in the Middle East have pumped a lot of money into this event so that it can have, Grammy-nominated producers, so that they can have 6 ring girls instead of 2 ring girls, so that they can play a developing movie throughout the event. We don't have to talk about fighter pay or nothing, but this is supposedly the highest gate the UFC's ever done. I feel like they're inflating the numbers a little bit, but that's just me. And they're also saying that this is supposed to be the most monumentous card, but when we're actually looking at the fights that are taking place, this card is insanely main event, co-main, and then I would say that the T-City, Brian Ortega and Diego Lopes is sort of the people's main event fight that a lot of people are very excited for. Other than the main, co-main, and the featured fight, it gets real stinky real fast. Obviously, the intention of this fight being, and again, it feels like they crammed a lot of things into one here. This is a fight for Mexican Independence Day. The production and the films, they're all going to be Mexico themed. And as you can see, there is a Mexican-born fighter in every single fight other than the main event between Sean O'Malley and Merab Dvalishvili. They couldn't exactly put Alexa Grasso as the main event. I bet you they would have liked if Brandon Moreno was still a champion. But let's be honest here. I don't really see the allure in this having to be an all Mexico card. I think that the event would be a little bit more intriguing. Look, they could still have 5 fights with Mexican fighters and then 5 high-level fights. And let's just also talk about the fact that this card only has 10 fights on it, which, I don't know. Again, they're going to probably do a 6-hour run of shows still and just, have all of this additional filler production stuff. I know you hardcores like myself don't really give a shit, right? That's when you're going to get up. That's when you're going to get a new brewski, go take a piss. What we really want to do is watch the fights. I would have liked if they put some more high-level fights on this card. But anyway, we got what we got. At least we have some bangers at the top of the card. So let's get into it. We have chiwiwis himself, Raul Rosas Jr., who is taking on Aoriqileng. Now, it's very clear, and for anybody who's new to the sport, this is not the NFL. This is not the MLB. When you win, I guess it's a little bit different because those sports have regular seasons, so maybe it's not the best analogy, but let's just put it this way. Normally, if you're doing well and you're winning, you get higher levels of competition. I guess that's what the playoffs are supposed to do for these, more traditional sports. In our sport of MMA, what you see more often than not is a fighter who, and I do understand, right? He's 19 years old, so I'll give him a little bit of credit for why they're doing this, but sometimes they give a fighter like Raul Rosas Jr., an opponent like Ricky Tercios, where it's like that made sense in terms of his progression. He did drop the L to Christian Rodriguez. He gets a W against Terrence Mitchell. Then again, every single, I don't think Terrence Mitchell has a UFC win. And it made sense, right? Like, we're rising him up. I think it would have made more sense to pair him with a Montel Jackson. But they give him Aoriqileng. I think that honestly, this is an easier fight for him than Ricky Tercios. And the line would certainly suggest that. I mean, he's a 7-1 favorite. But let's talk about the Mongolian Murder. Mongolian murderer, very abrasive nickname. Aoriqileng is, he's a fun fighter, but I mean, we've seen this guy drop losses to Jeff Molina. I mean, the Cody Durden loss isn't too bad. The Eamon Zahabi loss isn't really too bad either, I suppose. But, he's just sort of, from what we've seen in the UFC so far, he's a 3-3 fighter. You win some, you lose some, you build up stars like Raul Rosas Jr. I don't really see a path to victory, if I'm being honest, for Aoriqileng. Normally, I will try to, even if I think that it's a bit of a lopsided fight, paint the path to victory, but I really just don't see one. The Mongolian murderer, if he's going to get it done, it's going to be by knockout, but he's not one of these guys that has, one-shot knockout power. I mean, he's mostly winning by decision when he does win. And Raul Rosas Jr. is a very high-level jiu-jitsu practitioner. And not only that, but El Nino Problema has some pretty solid wrestling. So hot take, I think that Raul Rosas Jr. is going to implement his grappling to great effect, and that he is going to defeat the Mongolian murderer who, has been submitted 3 times in his career. So he's probably going to get the rear naked choke. Raul Rosas Jr. seems to always find the back. If he doesn't, then I think that he's going to win an incredibly dominant, unanimous decision. And hopefully then we get to see that step up in competition that we really need to see to understand what the ceiling is for Raul Rosas Jr. Again, he's 19 years old. So, there's a lot of time to develop, which I understand why, they don't want to feed him to the monsters, but there are trickier matchups that they can feed him at bantamweight than Aoriqileng. And I know that they don't necessarily want to, they don't want to send him in there against a Peyton Talbot and it's one of their prospects has to go. It would be better for those guys to meet down the line. So I'm not suggesting that, but there are some matches in bantamweight, again, like Montel Jackson, or possibly even Eamon Zahabi would be an interesting matchup. Moving on to the next fight, which is an interesting one, Edgar Cháirez versus Joshua Van. I say it's an interesting one because I would be all over Joshua Van here, pause, but he is coming off of his first knockout loss in the UFC, which was literally just a few months ago. And I know it was to Charles Johnson, who's, very game. But it's a little bit worrisome. It wasn't a gruesome knockout, where you see him out cold, like Kamaru Usman, with his eyes still open. But still, it's a little bit worrisome. And then you have Edgar Cháirez, who, if you're looking at his record, right, 11-5, you're not overly impressed. But if we're looking at his UFC run so far, he loses to Tatsuro Taira. No problem there, right? I think Tatsuro Taira is going to be a future champion in the flyweight division. And then he has a very impressive triangle choke victory against Daniel Lacerda, who, again, isn't a world beater by any means, but I don't necessarily see somebody, and when you're looking at some of these guys who he's lost to, Clayton Carpenter, Jesus Aguilar, Alberto Trujillo. Actually, I haven't heard of that guy, but Jesus Aguilar and Clayton Carpenter. These are guys who we've seen and we're familiar with. And so I'm not going to say that this with all of the confidence in the world, because there is just this question mark when you see, when somebody comes back too soon. Again, he is 22. So sometimes you see somebody get knocked out like Volk and then come back a few months later when they're getting into their 30s where maybe it's more of an issue. And Volk does cut a lot to make featherweight. Joshua Van isn't a massive flyweight, right? I mean, he's only 5'5" and he's got a 65-inch reach. If they had an atom weight, if they had a straw weight for men's, I think that he'd be down there, but they don't. So I'm going to go with Joshua Van still, because from what we have seen in matchups other than the Charles Johnson matchup. Very crisp boxing. Maybe a little bit of suspect takedown defense, but I don't really see him working his offensive grappling where Edgar Cháirez seems to kind of have this Mexican fighter approach that we're seeing where it's like a boxer jiu-jitsu kind of a game. I haven't really seen a massive wrestling game from Edgar Cháirez. So like I do think that this is going to be a competitive matchup, but I'm going to go with Joshua Van to win a decision. Moving on to the next fight on the card, we have Yazmin Jauregui or Jauregui. Gosh, she's got a very difficult last name to pronounce. Versus Ketlen Souza. Now, again, this is a matchup where a Mexican fighter is a very heavy favorite. So it does feel like I'm just going to call her Yazmin. Just going to try to refrain from saying her last name because it is tricky. Yazmin is a heavy favorite, and for good reason, right? I mean, we did see her get flatline KO'd by Denise Gomes. But look, Gomes has bricks in her hands, and other than that, right, we've seen some pretty dominant performances against, Yazmin Lucindo, Estela Nunes. I would be worried if she hadn't fought since the Denise Gomes fight. She literally got knocked out in 20 seconds. And for a female fighter to get knocked out in 20 seconds, you don't see that often, which can speak to the damage that she could have taken from that. But she comes back and beats Sam Hughes. I mean, Sam Page isn't really somebody who we think of as like a future title challenger, but Sam Hughes will surprise you and fraud check a girl who, maybe Sam Hughes will be a, plus 200 favorite and then come out and win a dominant decision. So, she's a competent enough fighter to where I think that is an impressive win in my book. And Ketlen Souza, we've only really seen two of her performances in the UFC. Getting knee barred by Karine Silva isn't necessarily, the worst thing. But again, I mean, we're a 1-1 fighter, and even in her performance against Marnik Mann, it's like I don't really rate Marnik Mann as a very talented prospect by any means. She's 0-2 in the UFC. Probably we're going to see her one more time and then, back off to the regional scene you go. So, I wouldn't necessarily say that I think that Yazmin is deserving of being like, I know that, she's like a 5.5 to 1 favorite. Raul Rosas Jr. is a little bit of a bigger favorite, but I don't necessarily think that she should be that big of a favorite. I would think maybe more like minus 300 or so, but I do think that she is going to get the victory. And what is she normally getting it done by? She's a pretty prolific finisher. Has Souza been knocked out? She has. Oh, she's only lost by finish, not by decision. Wow. Okay. I'm gonna go with Yazmin to get a spectacular knockout, and Mexican crowd and all the Mexican fans watching around the world going absolutely nuts. Moving on, we have Manuel Torres versus Ignacio Bahamondes. Okay, we're getting into the good stuff here. I'm going to go with Manuel Torres. I think that Manuel Torres, from what we have seen in his UFC run so far, it's been flawless. I haven't seen, I understand that it's a limited sample size, but submitting Chris Duncan, who is a prospect at lightweight in the first round handily, I just haven't really seen any flaws in his game. He seems to be really sound. And I know that in this matchup, he's going to be giving up a decently considerable reach advantage. I want to get this pulled up just so that, okay, actually it's pretty similar. Okay, so Bahamondes has a 5-inch height advantage, but he's only got a 2-inch reach advantage. All right, well that actually that even further strengthens my argument. Torres is not operating on a massive reach deficit. And talking about Ignacio Bahamondes, I mean, we've definitely seen some pretty solid performances from him, but we've also seen some stinkers, right? Like his UFC debut. I understand he was, so that was 3 years ago. So he was 24 at the time, but losing a split decision to John McDessie, very suspect. And sure, he's had some decent wins. I'd say Trey Ogden is the best one, but the Roosevelt Roberts win, the Rong Zhu win, and the Christos Giagos win, none of those really impressed me. So if we're really looking at, and like even if he had beaten John McDessie, it wouldn't have impressed me. So if we were looking at actual high level performances, he's 1-1, and he got beat pretty handily against Ludovic Klein, who again is a solid fighter. But I don't know. I think that I might pick Manuel Torres to win. So I think that Bahamondes is like tough enough to not get finished. Certainly not by knockout. I guess potentially he could get submitted, but I think that his BJJ game is good enough to allow him to not get submitted. I'm going to go with Manuel Torres to win a decision. That's a pretty high level fight though, and a pretty exciting fight. Okay, moving on to the featured bout of the prelims. We have Irene Aldana versus Norma Dumont. And I think that Irene Aldana is going to have one of those, y'all must have forgot performances. Certainly, I'm not saying that this is a lock because we have seen tough performances from her where she left a little bit to be desired, but that was against Holly Holm 4 years ago before Holly Holm was, just clinching girls up against the cage and when she was actually utilizing her striking. Loses a split against Raquel. I know this is all the way back in 2019, but I think she arguably beat Raquel Pennington back then. So, like, if we're really just like honing in on the last 6 years, she's lost a split to Raquel Pennington that I think she actually won. Lost to Holly Holm. Again, at that time, Holly Holm was doing her thing. And in a title fight against the female GOAT, Amanda Nunes. I know she really, really didn't show up in that fight against Amanda Nunes, but she looked very solid against Carl Rosa. I mean, they had a banger of a fight on that Edwards versus Covington card. That might have been the most exciting fight on the card, in my opinion. And Carl Rosa, I mean, she can bang. Like, she's a very solid fighter. I like watching her fight. I think that Carl Rosa is, she's only ranked number 11, but I think she's one of the best. She's one of the best bantamweight fighters. And so I'm going to go with Irene Aldana here. I think that Norma Dumont is like, she's one of these fighters who, if she is able to impose her physicality and hold you up against the cage and implement her wrestling, she's going to win a very one-sided decision. But I don't see Irene Aldana. I don't see her getting dominated in the grappling. Norma Dumont, she's not Bilal Muhammad. She's not going to be able to beat her in the striking, the wrestling, and the grappling. She's not going to be able to do that. Her only path to victory is really holding her up against the cage and trying to work a trip takedown. She had a impressive performance against Jermaine Durandamy, and then, again, against a handful of the Carlosa win is impressive. Okay, I have to give it to her. But again, I think that styles make fights, and I just don't see Norma Dumont being able to, sometimes you run the risk with WMMA fights where the judges forget that it's damage-based scoring, and they'll give a fighter a W just because they racked up a little bit of control time. But I think the reason why that might happen sometimes is because some of these WMMA fighters, like, even if they're landing strikes, they're not landing hard enough strikes. And Irene Aldana has very solid boxing, very solid kickboxing, just overall. So based on the damage-based scoring model that we're supposedly in 2024, I'm going to go with Irene Aldana to possibly win by knockout and steal the show, but more likely by decision. Moving on, we have a fight that does not deserve to be on the main card. I don't understand why this fight is on the main card, and I'm not going to give it its flowers. Ronaldo Rodriguez is going to win. Ode Osbourne is a school teacher who like fights on the side and builds up fighters' careers in the flyweight division. That's all he's really done in the UFC. And clearly the UFC is trying to put a little promo behind Ronaldo Rodriguez. That's why they have him on the main card. Really don't get why the Manuel Torres and Ignacio Bahamondes fight isn't here on the main card. I mean, I truly don't understand. Like, I think Ronaldo Rodriguez has a decently large TikTok following. Is the UFC really at a point where a TikTok following is going to impact your card placement to the point where a obvious choice for a fight? Like, I'd also rather Irene Aldana and Norma Dumont. I'd rather Raul Rosas Jr. This should be the curtain jerker. It should be the first fight of the card. The UFC is off their rocker for putting this on the main card. It is truly disgusting behavior by them. So yeah, Ronaldo Rodriguez will beat Ode Osbourne. Moving on to another fight that's like, I mean, not that great, but it is interesting enough to where I guess like it considering the inventory of the other fights that we have on this card, I guess I get why it's on the main card. It would be like the feature fight of the prelims on like an actual UFC pay-per-view. And then you got the Abu Dhabi card has cards on the fights on the prelims that are better than the. Anyway, I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. Daniel Zellhuber versus Esteban Ribovics. And I think you guys are seeing a trend here. I'm going to go with the Mexican fighter, Daniel Zellhuber. I think that Daniel Zellhuber is, first of all, it's strange how similar he looks to Ryan Garcia. I've never seen the two of them in the same room, so look into that. But Daniel Zellhuber is a very lanky fighter who utilizes his range quite well. I could see him having problems against somebody who has, really solid grappling at the lightweight division. But against an opponent like Esteban Ribovics, who's sort of like in UFC 5 career mode, he's like the Michael Chandler body type, El Gringo. I think that the Golden Boy is going to, and he's got an 8-inch reach advantage. That is considerable. I think that he's going to be able to piece up Esteban Ribovics, and I can see like a late second round, third round TKO. I think that the volume is going to accumulate on Esteban. Daniel Zellhuber is not Terrence McChinney. He's not going to go into a phone booth type battle and get head kicked by Esteban Ribovics. So I'm going with the flow of this card. I think that they want to see a bunch of Mexican fighters do well. So I'm going to go with Daniel Zellhuber, second or third round TKO. Okay, moving on to you guys want to know who I think is going to win this fight? I'm glad you asked. Moving on to the feature. Well, it's the card before the co-main. Very exciting fight. Brian Ortega versus Diego Lopes. It's a reschedule from UFC 303 where Brian Ortega, he sometimes the eagle gets the sniffles. Sometimes the eagle can't make weight. And so when if you guys will go back to my UFC 303 video, I went with Diego Lopes, but since then, I've gotten a little bit of, I guess, the benefit of hindsight watching Diego Lopes fight. Oh, wow. I can't believe I'm blanking on this. Dan Ige, oh my gosh. After watching his performance versus Dan Ige, I think that it gave me a little bit of like hindsight clarity that, Diego Lopes sometimes, and Charles Oliveira had this happen to him against Arman Sarukian, where sometimes these BJJ guys, and I know that obviously T-City, it's his fucking nickname. Brian Ortega is obviously a very high-level black belt as well. But sometimes, especially like these guard player style jiu-jitsu guys, they're too confident in their jiu-jitsu, and they really believe that they're going to be able to get a submission. I'm going to say with a lot of confidence that Diego Lopes is not going to submit Brian Ortega off of his back. And Diego Lopes, he's a fast starter, right? He's really wild, explosive, powerful, fun. But I think that this is a bad matchup for him as I've had more time to think about this. I really do. Look, man, the eagle, he went back up to the mountain and he broke off his beak. The rebirth is here. I'm going with Brian T. City Ortega to win a decision. And spoiler alert, I think that this is actually going to be a really boring fight because I think that Brian Ortega is easiest path to victory is he's really actually gotten good at these body lock takedowns. I think that he's going to take Diego Lopes down. I think that we're going to see a lot of boos from the crowd. We might see them stand them up like Brian Ortega is in top position on full guard, landing some shots. We might see some Mexican Independence Day, UFC Noche bias where they stand Diego Lopes back up. Some of these things are hard to anticipate, you know? But if Brian Ortega is active enough in the guard and he's able to hold down Diego Lopes, maybe at least get into half guard where they're less likely to break it up. I could see Brian, the Eagle, Ortega putting on his wrestling shoes and getting a dub here. And this being a real shocker upset. I know that he's only a plus 155 dog, but it feels like the vast majority of the MMA community is going with Lopes. But I think that this is where I think that Lopes could be a future champion. But this is just and styles make fights, and this is just a really tough matchup for him, is what I realized after thinking about this fight a little bit more. So Brian, the Eagle, Ortega to win by decision. I'm going to keep this one simple, guys. I don't know why, like, they copy and pasted the Brandon Moreno, Davison Figueiredo storyline. Like, why are we doing all of these rematches? I guess this is just how the UFC has decided to market their flyweight decision or their flyweight division. Shevchenko is getting old, and like she thinks that she was winning the first fight, and she was, but she got stopped. She thinks she got robbed in the last fight, and maybe arguably she did because I don't know if that last one was a 10-8 round, man. But you know, I think that like Alexa Grasso going into that second bout, Valentina thought, okay, if I put the wrestling shoes on and I take her down and I camp in full guard, I'm going to have success. So the reason why I'm going with Alexa Grasso here to close out the rivalry and win the trilogy is because I'd have to imagine that her camp has had her working a lot on lateral movement. We always thought of Valentina as the best female, like I'd say Muay Thai style fighter, right? We've seen her head kick Jessica Ai into the shadow realm, but Alexa Grasso is a very solid boxer. So if Alexa Grasso is just able to move around a little bit more on the feet, not just completely whiff on a punch and get taken down and have Valentina camp in top full guard, I think that she's going to have more success here. She's also the fighter entering her prime versus the fighter who's exiting her prime. So, you know, I have to go with Alexa Grasso here. I really do. And also, guys, if you thought that the judges were biased at UFC Noche last year, do you think that it's going to be any different? So yeah, I think the obvious choice is to go with Alexa Grasso here. And please, for the love of God, we don't need to see a quadrilogy. I'd like to see the division move on. I want to see the winner fight Manon Fiorot. Okay, so moving on to the main event. Dude, can you imagine? Dude, imagine not picking Sean O'Malley to chin Merab Dvalishvili. Guys, Merab has staff. This matters. We've seen this matter. In the Benoit Saint Denis fight, fighters who weaponize their cardio are going to have a difficult time doing so when their body is full of antibiotics that literally like hurt their cardiovascular system. Sure, Merab is the machine, right? That is his nickname. And sure, look, the guy's probably on EPO, if we're being honest. I don't know how somebody could shoot that many takedowns and just go. I don't really think that he's doing something, you know, all these professional fighters and only guys like him and Bilal Muhammad are able to do that, who I also suspect is on EPO. You know, so yeah, I'm going to go with the Sugar Show. Sugar's lateral movement is beautiful. I believe that he's the greatest striker that the UFC has ever seen. Hot take. I know that people think that Israel Adesanya or Anderson Silva are, but I think that Sean O'Malley is. I think that his lateral movement is insane. I think that just like the Aljo fight, he's going to find the chin and he's going to sleep him. Guys, if you like the content, give a like and subscribe. MMA Jabroni is out.